This is Dr. Paul Dyer, Bridges Live, Mental Health Mondays, with special guest, Dr. Ryan C. Warner. Ryan C. Warner is also a consultant. He does a lot of public speaking. He's going to get to that again. Ryan was on before, but he's been out for a couple weeks. We like to do this every Monday so we can talk about mental health and beat this drum like we will every Monday about certain things. And I got some questions because there's different insights when it comes to mental health. We're just, and people, we're not all monolithic people. We're very monolithic, actually. We're very different and diverse. We don't all have the same types of issues, but we all have issues. And we all can look at it in a certain way where it helps us to say, I never thought of it that way. If someone says something that comes to you and you hear it, and you say, I never thought of it that way, that's a plus. That means you're cracking open to new possibilities and new avenues to awaken yourself to be healthy and whole. Ryan, thank you for coming on to Mental Health Mondays. Please tell people more about yourself again, and then we'll get right into Mental Health Monday.
Yeah, so I'm glad to be here. My name is Ryan C. Warner. I'm a licensed psychologist, a researcher, speaker, consultant. And I'm passionate about assisting teams with creating a culture of inclusion to maximize their potential. As the founder and CEO of RC Warner Consulting, LLC, I provide keynote speaking, executive coaching, as well as diversity consulting for small and large organizations across the globe.
You know, I now recently sat on a chair for the equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's a funny word to me that we actually literally have to have people to emphasize that there are others that are not included.
Mm-hmm. yeah, you think you wouldn't need that, but yeah, it's a lot of work out there. A lot of work needs to be done.
It's the saddest work ever to have a, I don't mind being, whatever, how you want to call it, but to have that type of thing that means that, you guys have never, whatever corporation, whatever company, you guys didn't care prior to this creation of this avenue that you were excluding. You were not including people. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, the harm is still the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And oftentimes I feel like, I feel like very limited amount of organizations are saying, oh, we're going to purposely do this, right? I think it's done in subtle ways that we may not realize through our policies, our procedures, and ultimately, sometimes, we need some assistance because we know when diversities are more inclusive, then we're actually more productive, we're more profitable, right? And units and teams are able to work together better. So,
have you ever heard of a person, you don't have to give their name, and that did not look at a resume, that they had the opportunity, whether HR or they're the hiring principal of a certain place, that they didn't look at names because of the way the name sounded? Have you came across that?
So you talk about like a blind review process, and I think that nowadays we're trying to, use more blind review processes because they're definitely biased when it comes to hiring.
Yeah.
But when you hear certain names, we may come up with certain ideas in our mind based on our previous experiences. But we may say, oh, well, that person, due to their name, may not be suitable or qualified for this position. And ultimately, that's a significant bias, right? That definitely is not true, just based on someone's, first name or last name. That blind review process can sometimes mitigate that bias so that everybody's looked at on the same level.
Which is fascinating because people say, well, when you talk to people and you hear the words come out of their mouth, you kind of look at them like, I never thought you would be able to do that. Those type of phrases is a biased statement. What do you mean you didn't think I could do that? Well, I don't mean to be, I don't mean to be bad or anything. I just think I couldn't picture you doing that. And I would always challenge that. Well, what picture do you have?
Yeah.
And how did you get that picture? Right.
And then what you're saying right now is an example of a microaggression, right? Those subtle, covert forms of discrimination. And when we experience microaggressions, especially in the workplace, we know that has a significant impact.
Yeah.
During those interactions, right? So, we see that all the time. I know I've experienced a lot of microaggressions just myself, and ultimately we need to find ways that we can mitigate that bias and that discrimination.
Now, I know in many places and talk shows and conversations, they always put that micro type of aggression and micro biasness on white people. But blacks have a tremendous hard of bias that they have for other people, including blacks, probably more so. And I think that type of separation creates that disconnect for us being whole as a community, whether it be a black community, African American community, or a whole community as a cultural of people of human race. We have to stop all biases. Is that possible? Because I believe it's possible, but does that make sense of what I'm saying?
Yeah, so when we think about microaggressions, the first thing that comes up are racial microaggressions.
Yeah.
But there's microaggressions related to other facets of identity as well.
Yeah.
Gender microaggressions, religious microaggressions, microaggressions based on sexual orientation, etc. And no one's immune from committing a microaggression, no matter your background, right? So when you ask the question, is it possible to take out all bias? I don't know. I mean, we think about from a primal sense, right? We innately have bias to survive as human beings, right? If I'm in the forest and I see a big, huge, furry animal, my bias is, oh, that animal is going to be a danger or a threat to my well-being. So for me to survive, for me to protect my family, I need to fight, flight, or flee, right? I need to get out of there. I need to do something. I need to take action. And sometimes we also have bias when just interacting day to day. When maybe we're walking down the street and somebody's getting a little close to us, right? And that person looks kind of quote unquote suspicious, right? Or there's any threat to our identity that we feel, that we perceive, then we're going to have that initial thought. But what we need to do is challenge that thought when it comes up.
There
and
it is.
That's going to help us to not have negative interactions and negative outcomes.
And I think that's the key point too, is challenge yourself, because you don't want others to always keep challenging you and putting the little Jimmy the Cricket on your shoulder going, should you be thinking that? No, I don't think that's right. Because we get so used to with our own biased statements that it becomes such a normalcy that we end up, again, like I said, called disconnecting from the possibility of love, compassion, and kindness because of those micro separations.
Mm-hmm. And I always say that having bias doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. Mm-hmm. And that's why I emphasize that it's not the bias that you have. It's about how you challenge it. It's about acknowledging that, yes, I do have bias, and that's okay. Right. But it's not okay not to do anything about it.
That's not okay. And so ask yourself the question, be more inquisitive and ask yourself, how come? Like, mm-hmm. Why wouldn't I think, Dr. Paul could ski? Mm-hmm. Like, why was that shocking to me? Or why didn't I not think that this person or that person could do this or have that? Like, where do those things come from? Because I think that's holding you back. I think that holds a person back. Again, goes back to that self-connection with self and that compassionate connection with someone else. Because if you hold that biasness, it's very hard for you to push to the other side of compassion and love and kindness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And even myself, I talk about these topics on a weekly basis, but I still make mistakes. And I remember I was just visiting my family in Chicago, and I went and saw my 90-year-old grandmother. And the first thing I did when I walked in is I started to raise my voice. I started to talk a little louder because I had a bias that because she was older, she could not hear me. And once I raised my voice a little bit at her, she was like, Ryan, you don't have to talk loud. I'm old, but I'm not deaf. Right. And I thought that was really funny because I realized that, that was my bias coming to fruition, right, and coming to play. And I had to say, I need to acknowledge that. And I need to be more aware of that next time.
I want to talk today about happiness. And I'm going to give you a small, narrow window because I think that people don't recognize happiness as a possibility because they either have never been happy. I'm not saying they have not been in joy, but happiness, I think, is different than joy Joy is at a birthday party. Joy to see your grandmother. That's joyful. Happiness is a linear thing. Is that are you able to explain the difference between happiness and joy? Or is there for you at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that when we talk about our emotions, these type of pleasurable type of emotions, expanding our vocabulary is really important.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So are you feeling happy? Are you feeling joyful? Are you feeling satisfied?
Right.
Are you feeling content? Right. And sometimes I know, especially when I do psychotherapy with patients who may experience long history of depression and maybe felt really low mood for a long time. A lot of people may not know what happiness looks like for them.
Right.
And also feeling quote unquote happy or this sense of satisfaction can sometimes be kind of scary. Right. And you would think that, why wouldn't everyone want to be happy? But for some individuals who, are so used to feeling down and low for so long, feeling happy is kind of scary because that may not make them feel like in control of their emotions. That may be a lot different than what they used to feel. Right. So I try to normalize, all emotions. Right. And happiness or satisfaction or contentment may look different for everyone. And yeah, I think there's no right or wrong way to experience that.
So when you tell people, when I do it too, happiness is different for you than it is for me. But recognizing your happiness is so different that there is a sense of how your body feels that goes back to that self-awareness. I was just giving a class today on Qigong, and a person just released a lot of tears and then started to smile because they've never felt that light before. That heaviness was gone from the practice that we were doing. And then she started to cry because she's never felt like this before. And I'm saying, well, to me, it's the same as happiness. If you've never felt it, you don't know that you're in it. And if you're in it, you may not be so unaware that this is actually is, that you may think it's something abnormal.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great example, so sitting in that emotion, letting that person just feel that emotion is really important. That's one piece of being mindful, right? Because oftentimes when emotion comes up, we may not realize it or, we may not appreciate that in the moment. So sometimes, we just need to sit with our emotions and that's going to help us feel something.
When people look at others, and that comes with, and this is tough because it's all perceptional, right? Perception rules the world and every world that we're in. But when we look at others, I think we have a false sense of the difference between someone being spoiled and someone being happy. Someone say, man, they're just spoiled. But here's where I take on. I said, now, if you're happy within your life, good things happen to you, that things come to you, whether it be the new job, the new car, because your intentions change. So the attraction changes. So your happiness starts creating a different outlook, which creates a different reception that you're getting. Now, from an outside point of view, I think people look at that and saying that person is spoiled and they get all the things that they want. But maybe they're just missing that this person that they're talking about is just happy. And that's something they can't recognize. So how can we help someone look at someone else and say, are they happy and I don't know how to recognize it? Or are they spoiled and I think they're spoiled because I don't know how to recognize happiness? Either one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's tough because once again, it depends on that person. And I think instead of, us trying to help them get to a certain emotion, maybe just starting with helping them just sit in their emotion and recognize how they feel. So if it's not happiness, what is it? Do they feel down? Do they feel dissatisfied with certain things in their life? Do they feel that they're not confident in themselves? Well, what is it, right? So being able to help them expand their vocabulary around their emotion, I think it could be important, because oftentimes we may want someone to experience a certain emotion, but that may be hard for them. They may not be there yet. So just meeting each person where they're at, I think, is crucial.
But when we talk about companies, and you work with companies, how can they create an atmosphere that they are including and being have equality, so they can create a better atmosphere? Because if they never had it, it'd be tough for them to create, isn't that? Is that where it falls short?
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. When you're trying to change a culture, that's really challenging, right? Number one, change is hard, and especially when you're trying to get everybody on the same page. But ultimately, what I try to do is I look at outcomes, right? So right now, for instance, if I go into an organization and there's a lot of dissatisfaction with work, maybe they're dissatisfied with leadership, or they don't really feel that they have a sense of purpose, then that's a huge, issue, right? Because that has a significant impact on outcomes, right? On productivity, right? On the well-being of employees, et cetera. So I look at how can we change the outcome and how do we get there? And there's different steps that we can take so people can, have a sense of more satisfaction, when they go into their workplace. But that can be challenging over time to shift that culture.
What are some of the key points that you can help to help companies recognize the culture that they have isn't conducive to a good output, good work output? What are some of those tips they could recognize and be like, yeah, this is not a good company I would like it to be?
So first of all, you have to have input from all stakeholders. Okay. So sometimes we just look at leadership and leadership says, oh, well, I think this.
Right. And that's it.
Sometimes they live in their own bias, right? They only see their perspective based on their specific position that they're in. But it's important to collect that data, from employees, whether that be objectively, sending out surveys or having one-on-one interviews, or also subjectively, being able to engage in focus groups, right? And different things like that. So understanding the experience of all individuals is a way that you can be inclusive to figure out how you can improve your workplace overall.
Do you think people are honest in the workplace? Because I don't think they are.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I don't think people are very confident that if they say, I dislike the way this leadership is, that they feel like they could keep their job.
I see.
So that's tough to be so expressive, be like, yeah, this place is horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, when you feel, especially if you have less power, and if you say the wrong thing that someone with more power can take away certain things in your life, then yeah, that's kind of scary, right? And I definitely see that a lot, especially working with individuals at lower levels and maybe individuals who are not senior leadership. They feel like there may be some retaliation, right? If they say certain things. And that's hard, right? I think that shows that there may be a toxic environment if you feel that leadership isn't receptive to feedback or that you're not able to be yourself or be honest. So...
And I think it's honesty, not with the workplace, but we're going back to that bias feeling that you might have. Like again, the CFO, the CEOs, their honesty is, a lot different than a person that's not them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to speak to my honesty when, the pie is, the tilt is, it's a huge gain there. Right, and a huge loss for me.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I'm good at my product or wherever position I'm at, I'm very good at it. But they could still be like, "Yeah, I don't want this person around," because next thing you know, they're going to start complaining. It's going to cost us money with the investigation and the HR complaint. Yeah, they'd just rather let someone go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's tough. That's challenging. Yeah.
I want to give a good clinical tip into finding someone's joy and happiness, or recognizing that they're not as joyful, as happy as they perceive to be.
Is there more about that so I can a little background?
So, I always believe in hearing people's words. I'm okay. I'm fine. It'll be all right. They're not strong words to self-intentional feelings. They're very passive. And they're so used to being, I'm good. I'll be all right. another day. All those different words to me are unhappy red flares. And I don't think people recognize those flares that they are personally shooting off, that they're just not happy.
Yeah, so I think I'll maybe use the word contentment, right? Because sometimes there's a difference between being totally dissatisfied with your job or, not just being content, and I think that sometimes we strive towards contentment, and then once we have that, then maybe we can start to experience that joy, that happiness, that sense of satisfaction. But I think there are definitely signs like I think about if you just wake up each and every day, and you may not feel like a purpose. You may feel that, there's no direction. You're just going through the motions. And sometimes that's what we do. When we wake up, every week is the same. We just go through the motions, right? And we talked about this last episodes about just surviving. Sometimes we just try to survive. Yeah. Right. And I think that's a sign right there that, you're definitely not feeling satisfied, with what you're doing, either your job or, just your overall, things you're doing in your life. Right. And I often think about that we have to be able to take steps and strive so we can find that purpose, that meaning behind what we do. And sometimes we can't find that in our job, in our work.
No.
And but maybe we can find it elsewhere.
Those steps, what are some of those steps that people can start stepping forward to so they can start going down this path? What are some of those steps that you have for some of your clients or that you've talked to in the past or previous?
Yeah, so the first thing is just recognizing, okay, how do I feel right now? How would I label my emotion in this time, right? And then once you recognize how you feel, then we have to figure out, okay, where do you want to be? Are you content with being content? Are you content with, being not satisfied? And if that's the case, there's nothing else we can do, right? Because ultimately, especially me as a helping professional, I come in and I can't make you do anything, right? Ultimately, you can do motivational interviewing. You can try to help people accomplish their goals. And then, if I'm working harder than the person sitting next to me, then it's not going to work, right? So I need to understand, where do you want to go for the future? And I would advise people to think about that. Just sit down, just reflect on, your life, your goals. It doesn't have to just be occupational goals. It just be in life. Right? Maybe you're a mother or you're a husband or, maybe you're a sister or brother. Maybe you want to improve your relationships with your family, right? Or maybe you want to change your career path, or maybe you don't know what you want to do, right? And that's okay.
Because, when people come out of incarceration, there's a whole mindset we have to get them to go through so they don't go back in, right? And it's not so much. It's also the triggers, but it's also asking them to change some antisocial behaviors that you turn into normal, that it isn't normal. Like, pushing on someone so you can stand in a certain spot. That's not normal behavior in a collective social society. But that it was normal for you wherever you were, where you had to make sure that you get the bread first type thing. But in this society, antisocial behavior is very unhealthy for all of us, including you, because then someone's going to end up sending you back to being incarcerated. And I think a lot of people may not have been incarcerated, but they have a lot of antisocial behaviors.
Yeah, so I mean, in general, we're talking about behaviors. We're talking about behavior change, right? And if we do have that motivation or have, that part of us that does want to change, that does want to engage in different behaviors, because maybe we feel like what we're doing is detrimental, or maybe we feel that it's not helpful or adaptive for our well-being. Once again, we have to first recognize that, hey, we want to change. We have to, number two, identify, what's the purpose? What's going to motivate us? And if you've ever read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, he talks about you have to find your compass direction, right? Like we can get on a boat and we can just sail, And when we sail, we may see some really cool things on our journey, right? But it's not really as fulfilling if you don't know where you're going. It's not as fulfilling if you don't know your destination. So we have to identify what is our destination, whether that be in life or our destination with our career or specific goals that we want to accomplish. And then that's going to help motivate us, to change our behaviors in the long term.
Because, this diagram behind me that people see as my backdrop, it's the brain that's firing in the different synapses and signals. If you do not have intentions, your messaging cells, which is your dopamine and your serotonin, doesn't really have a direction where to go to hit you in the spots that it needs to hit. So you have all these misfirings all over the place. So when people say you need to be more intentional, it's better to be more intentional. If you don't have what you call self-attention, then your messaging to your cells are going to be very disconnected. And I think that then it comes along with changing. How do you change behavior if you can't even change the signal? It's almost impossible to do.
Yeah, all of this is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is better understanding that relationship between the thoughts you have, your emotions and the behaviors that you engage in. And we know when we improve our emotional intelligence through different strategies, then we're able to ultimately have a higher sense of well-being, a higher sense of satisfaction in life, and improve our relationships as well. So that emotional intelligence is typically not taught, to us at a young age. Sometimes we have to develop that. Sometimes we have to be intentional, like you said.
I don't know how people are going to develop it when certain communities don't even know anything about it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
I mean, it's almost like listening to children saying, "Why do we have farmers when we have grocery stores?" Mm-hmm. It's such a disconnect between, wait a minute, we need farmers because that's where they would grow food. Grocery stores would sell the food. And if they don't know where corn really comes from, they're just thinking it comes from your local market, right? And there's literally still children out there who don't. They have such a disconnect between how things are and what things is for them, right? If I live in this neighborhood, if I live in this type of community, I just think this is normal. But when you bring them outside of the neighborhood, they actually say those people are strange. Mm-hmm. And that's where that disconnect between antisocial behavior, it's hard for them to get out of that when their normal life is such a high level of antisocial behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the things you watch in the media, your childhood upbringing, the individuals that you spend time with, all that contributes to, once again, that bias that we have or our own perspective. And if we only live in our perspective, then yes, it's definitely it's hard to see any other perspective, right, or any other experience. And that's my job, as a psychologist, to help teach others about emotional intelligence, to go into communities so they can be more aware, and ultimately, it's a large task, but hopefully, through outreach, through getting different platforms like this, we can spread that word and that knowledge.
Before we take off, there has been some things that's been happening down at the border, even in your hometown, Chicago. The numbers of shooting that goes on in Chicago is hitting record numbers. This is not a number that needs to be put in the world record books, but it's hitting record numbers in Chicago, record numbers here in Baltimore. Trauma is being inflicted on us every time you pick up social media or news or a piece of paper.
Yep.
We don't want to bury our heads. We have to keep our heads up. But what is some of those things that's going to help them keep our heads up, to keep aware, and yet stay working on that health to not allow this trauma to sink in and settle?
So we have to first be able to identify what is trauma and how does it impact us. And once again, when someone grows up in a community in which things are normalized, shootings are normalized, trauma normalized, and that generational trauma continues to get passed down, then we may not label that as trauma. We may label that as that's life.
That's Saturday.
Right? Yeah, definitely. So we have to recognize that trauma does exist, and it has a significant impact. When we talk about perpetuating, our pain onto others, hurt people,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we look at the violence, when we look at, other disparities that we see, especially in racial, ethnic, marginalized populations, right? We have to identify that, hey, this is trauma. This is how it looks. And but ultimately, we can take the step, to mitigate, that trauma from perpetuating throughout the future generations. And that's hard to identify. That's hard to take that first step. But I think the first piece is awareness. And then there's a lot of barriers, right, to actually seeking help, right? There may not be a lot of individuals who look like you, right? There may be, when we look at the just economic disparities, it may be hard to, have the resources and the means, right, to seek adequate health care. Right? There's so many different barriers and challenges. But I think that being able to first just identify, hey, this is trauma and I need to figure out how I can seek help. If it's not professional help, maybe I need to just be more aware of the emotions that I have. Or maybe I need to seek out people who I trust so I can get some things out of my chest instead of pushing it down and avoiding it, right? And try not to talk about it, right? So there's small steps we can take, and I definitely identify the challenges with that. But these conversations continue to be had because I don't have the answer to fix all of this right now, but just talking about it is the first step.
I actually agree, and that's why I bring it up to you because, like I said in the beginning, we come from different areas, different spaces, and different thought process, and just having those conversations, like, what do you think about those shootings that happened in Chicago? It's tragic, I know. So how did it affect you? What did it touch you? It made me mad. Yeah, it kind of makes me upset, but what does it make you mad? Like you said, mad. My question is mad is such an abusive word to me. Does it make, so what are you going to do now? Like, are you just going to stay mad, or are you going to get involved, or what are you going to, so I think those dinner conversations, those we call those front porch conversations, if we don't have them, then they just sit inside of our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And that totally makes us sick.
And also, we have to learn how we can sit with our vulnerability as well. It's easy to say I'm mad. It's harder to say, no, they actually really hurt me.
Right.
Or I really feel kind of down and I feel kind of depressed today. I feel kind of sad. That's harder to say, right? But the more we normalize, and I think we are finding, that shift a little bit. We look at the athletes who have been coming out. We've looked at
happy about all that.
Saying, talking about their experiences, and we're starting to normalize a little bit more. So we obviously have a lot more work to do, but I do see that shift a little bit recently.
I was just watching that some Sunday Football, and one of their commercials with one of the players was talking about his mental health. Man, my heart smiled from wall to wall. It was amazing. I was like, this is awesome. You know what I mean? And so I do love it. I do love it because when we see some of these young athletes and actors talking about it, I think it helps the people in our communities, the black and brown communities, that's going to be like, hey, he, she, them, or they say it. I guess it's okay for me to do it too. I mean, and it's funny because I mentioned that to someone. They're like, well, just because they do it doesn't mean I would do it. And I looked down at their feet and said, so why are you wearing Nikes? He goes, because it's a good shoe. I'm like, come on, bro. I know the only reason why you're wearing Nikes is because there was something that triggered something that made you start to go out and buy Nikes. You may wear them now because you like it, but your initial contact was to something that created that type of, I would like to be just like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, well, like I said, what we see in the media, on the individuals we hang around, our childhood experiences, all of those factors, influence, how we think, influence the things that we want in life, and influence who we want to be, et cetera, right? So if we see more people being vulnerable, if we see more people saying, hey, let's find ways to improve our emotional intelligence. Well, let's talk about trauma. Let's talk about how it's impactful. Let's talk about what we can do. Then we're going to normalize that over time, and pass that on to future generations.
Do you have an intake questionnaire that you do for certain people?
Yes.
I think next week, if we're able to come on, it'd be great. Let's everyone take that intake quiz and just see how where those questions can help lead you to understanding more about them. Because I think most people look at the intake questionnaire, they're like, this is so silly when they're filling it out. But they don't understand the intake question has a lot of cracks that help open you up to what the clinician is trying to see. Because this is the first time we're seeing you, and some of those intake forms are very good to say, hey, I see you didn't answer this question. What was about this question? Well, I didn't know how to answer it. That's important. Not knowing something is also just as important as what you think it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and once again, we sometimes only live in our personal, lens or our personal bubble. And then when you go through these different type of intakes, and you get asked these questions that maybe you never thought about that.
Right.
Have you ever experienced trauma as a child? You look back and like, well, I don't know if I identified as trauma back then. That's just how I grew up.
Right.
But yes, I mean, my parents, they hit me, or I was sexually abused, or this happened to me, or I witnessed this, etc. And then you're like, oh, is that trauma? I didn't really know that. I just thought that was my experience, right? So that's important to be able to bring it to your awareness. And sometimes that's hard because you want to avoid that. You don't want to think about those bad memories at all, right? You want to push those down. But ultimately, we have to approach instead of avoid if we want to see progress and if we want to be able to process some of this unresolved trauma and experiences.
I think of all the lives that could have been saved if some of the African Americans, black community, Latinx, all of the minorities opened up to the trauma they were going through. Like, the drinking and the stuff that went on that killed so many of them for so many other reasons, it was probably they were hiding so much of that pain. And yet they were very talented enough to enter our lives, whether it be athletic, music, or on the big screen, and yet we lost them probably because no one cared enough to sit with them and to visit with them and to talk with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes, we don't know how to cope with our pain, right? Mm-hmm. So we look at instant gratification. What's going to get rid of this the fastest? If I drink this substance or I use this substance, then maybe I don't have to think about it today. But in the short term, you may find that effective. But in the long term, it's not effective at all.
Or spend that money you don't have. Charge this, buy this. That's all those other, what do you call it? And it seems comical to TV shows, shopping therapy. No, that's an unhealthy thing. Because you're spending more money than you probably make, and there's a lot of other things that's unpacking there that you're not getting that sense of wholeness. Yeah. And that's the other thing when it comes to awareness. If a person feels like if they feel broken, that's also tough for them to acknowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once again, I mean, being vulnerable is challenging, right? No one wants to feel vulnerable. No one wants to feel like quote unquote weak, right? But actually seeking help and actually acknowledging some of this pain doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you stronger, right? Because that's tough. That's hard to do, so we have to start shifting our mindset around these type of topics.
And I think we need to probably get more into that. How can someone start shifting your mindset? How can they do it? Like so many people it's almost like you trying to teach people how to drive a car. You put your foot on the pedal. This is gas. This is brake. This is the stick. This is But emotions and feelings aren't like driving a car. It's not so mechanical. It's not so. Just do this and you'll get you down the road. It's not. And I think we look at it, people want to look at it like, if I can't just do A, B, C, or D, then how do I know I'm going in the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
And that's very tough for them to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like once again, change is hard, but that doesn't mean change is impossible, right? We can take steps, to improve our awareness, right? To process some of these challenging things in our life. And that's ultimately going to enhance our well-being. That's going to help us feel more satisfied, as you say, maybe feel more happy or content, in life.
How's that new baby doing?
Yeah, he's doing well. He's 6 months. He's crawling in place now. He's turning over. So it's good to see him grow each and every day.
I'm glad. I'm sure the family enjoyed visit. Did you bring the baby home too?
Yes, I did. Yep, it was
Okay.
his first time on the plane, so he did well.
Excellent, excellent. Let everybody know where they can get a hold of you. If you
Yeah, definitely. So you can, if there are any follow questions or you want to reach out, just to learn more, you can contact me via email at rcwarnerconsulting@gmail.com. You can also check out my website at www.rcwarnerconsulting.com and also Google my name, Dr. Ryan C. Warner, to find out other things that's going on.
Ryan, stay blessed, stay healthy, stay compassionate, and keep on loving, brother. Thank
No,
you
I
so
really appreciate
much.
it.
Because a lot of work to do, but I'm glad you're out here working.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
You have a good night. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Bridges Live Mental Health Mondays. We'll be back here next Monday. Every Monday, we will talk about forms and actions of mental health. Stay vigilant, keep aware, and if you have any questions, just ask. You're not alone. Don't do this alone. Because if you feel like you're alone, you're going to end up harming yourself or committing suicide. And we need you around to make this a better world. We do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.